25th through the 28th. We now found ourselves removed to the governor's residence, which is called the castle. It is a spacious building and agreeably situated. Our condition was now changed very much for the better. We were still guarded by sentinels, it is true, but everything was under my orders, and there seemed to be an endeavor to furnish us profusely with everything. Do not spare, the major domo often repeated. The Honorable East India Company pays for all. But these tardy attentions produced little effect upon me. I had but one object in view, namely a prompt decision, and that I could not obtain. The governor came to me every day, but it was merely to utter a few complimentary phrases and not a word of my affairs. However, it was now indispensable to come to the point. The endless difficulties that had arisen and my endeavors to avert them had kept me in a continual state of agitation, and vexation of mind was combined with grief of heart. This complication of misery had wrought a kind of revolution in my whole frame. I suddenly felt myself 10 years older and experienced the first symptoms of those infirmities which have ever since been daily increasing and which will only terminate with my life. I was absolutely in a critical state. When I arrived in the town, the governor was struck with my extreme debility and the change that had taken place in my appearance. I was scarcely able to maintain the conversation. Apparently, with the intention of rousing me, Sir Hudson Lowe mentioned that the emperor had expressed a very great wish to see me before my departure. On hearing this, I was deeply moved. Tears flowed from my eyes, and I was so incapable of bearing this violent emotion that I nearly fainted. My son afterwards informed me that the governor appeared very much embarrassed by the condition to which he saw me reduced. However, making an effort to collect my strength, I once more begged that Sir Hudson Lowe would give orders for my removal as speedily as possible. He at length determined that my departure should take place 2 days afterwards. He informed me that he had procured a ship of war, which would be more suitable for my conveyance, while at the same time I should enjoy the advantage of having a medical attendant on board. The 29th. Early this morning, an officer came to request that we would pack up our things to be conveyed on board the ship, as it was determined we should depart very shortly. This we looked upon as the hour of our deliverance. In a few minutes, all that we possessed was packed up, and we were in perfect readiness. At length, the wished-for moment of departure was at hand. How our sentiments vary according to the circumstances in which we happen to be placed. But a short time ago, I should have considered it the greatest misfortune that could befall me to have been separated from the emperor and removed from St. Helena. But my late resolutions, the manifest wish of Sir Hudson Lowe, the positive words of the emperor, I request you, in a case of need, I command you to quit this island, together with other important observations which fell from him in the course of previous conversation, and which I cannot hint at here, though they are entirely foreign to politics, and finally the chimeras which my own imagination had conjured up, all now caused me to dread the thought of being longer detained. The hour of departure had already been specified, yet I nevertheless experienced the most cruel suspense, which the governor seemed to justify by keeping away nearly the whole of the day. Impatience and anxiety had thrown me into a fever, when about 6 o'clock in the evening the governor, whom I now despaired of seeing, made his appearance. After a little preamble in his usual way, he informed me that he had brought the Grand Marshal to take leave of me, and he conducted me into the adjoining apartment, where I had the happiness of embracing that esteemed companion of my exile. The emperor had instructed the Grand Marshal to tell me that he should see me desert with pleasure, and see me remain with pleasure. These were his words. He added that he knew my heart and my sentiments, and that he reposed full and entire confidence in me as to the chapters of the campaign of Italy, which I had requested permission to keep as a dear and precious memento. He granted them without hesitation, as well as anything else that might happen to be in my possession, for he was pleased to say that, while they were in my hands, he should consider them as being still in his own. Sir Hudson Lowe was with us during this interview, at which his presence was indispensable. The Grand Marshal commissioned me to make some purchases of books and other necessary or useful things to the Emperor, and he particularly requested me to send the monitors. Finally, he took leave of me, telling me significantly to act in all things as I should judge best. As I expected, the friendship of the Grand Marshal served only to increase my distress. He expressed his regret for my departure and tried to suggest reasons for inducing me to remain. His absence, said he, in a very graceful manner, addressing himself to the governor, will be regretted by us all. It will be a loss to the Emperor, and it will even be a loss to you, Sir Hudson Lowe. You will soon be convinced of this. The governor replied by an approving bow, and both endeavored to prevail on me to change my resolution. I could easily guess the governor's reasons for this, but I could not so well divine the cause of the Grand Marshal's entreaties, particularly after the message which he had just delivered to me from the Emperor. Besides, he was aware that, in addition to the numerous powerful motives which urged me to depart, Sir Hudson Lowe, as I believe I have already mentioned, offered not the least concession on his part. He insisted on retaining my papers and required my implicit submission. By this means, I should, as it were, have legalized all his measures. By the precedent thus granted, I should have authorized him to seize and imprison any one of us whenever he might take a fancy to do so. I could not, without the Emperor's express command, submit to such outrages, and therefore I firmly resisted them. It was now late in the evening, and as our final arrangements were not yet completed, the governor postponed our departure until the following day. He saw that I was vexed at this, and to console me, he said he would permit the Grand Marshal to visit me again. However happy I might be at the thought of seeing my friend once more, and receiving further communications from the Emperor, yet I was nevertheless distressed by this delay, which prolonged the conflict of my mind and lacerated the wounds of my heart. There are victories which can only be obtained by flight. The victory I was pursuing was one of this kind. The 30th, I received an early visit from Admiral Malcolm. He came to introduce me to Captain Wright, who was to convey me to the Cape on board the Griffin brig. The Admiral recommended me to Captain Wright as his friend, and in a very pleasing manner assured me that I should have every reason to be satisfied with the endeavors that would be made to render things agreeable to me. I duly appreciated this mark of delicate interest on the part of the Admiral, and the sentiment of sincere gratitude that arose in my heart was more forcibly felt than expressed. I was the more sensible of Admiral Malcolm's kindness, because his relations with the governor rendered it a point of delicacy with him to show me attention. Therefore, on the present occasion, he had the circumspection to bring along with him Sir Hudson Lowe's confidential man. I looked forward to the decisive moment with my usual anxiety, for the governor betrayed so much eagerness to induce me to remain that I was fearful he would finally start some unforeseen obstacle to my departure. About 11 o'clock, the Grand Marshal arrived, accompanied by the governor and some officers. He renewed his endeavors to prevail on me to return to Longwood, but without ever expressing the positive desire of the Emperor. Knowing my sentiments so well as he did, he must have been aware that a word would have decided me, but this word he did not pronounce, and he even avoided doing so when I pressed him to do it, always referring to the Emperor's message, which he had delivered to me on the preceding day. Thus, I had to defend myself against him, from whom I should have wished to receive support. His expressions of regard increased my distress, and I was perplexed between the wish of remaining and the determination of departing. If my heart dictated the one course, courage demanded the other, and I continued inflexible. I must not forget to mention that the Grand Marshal, in the course of conversation, informed me that the Emperor had wished to see me before my departure. The governor, however, required that an English officer should be present during our interview, and the Emperor renounced his intention, observing that I well knew he would deny himself the happiness of seeing his own wife and son on such conditions. How was I gratified by these words? I delivered to the Grand Marshal 13 bills of exchange on my banker in London for the 4,000 louis which I had so frequently offered to the Emperor, and which the Grand Marshal now informed me he had consented to accept. This was a real consolation to me. This business being settled, General Gourgaud, who had accompanied the Grand Marshal, was also permitted to enter and take leave of me. This new mark of interest, joined to many others which the General had shown me during my imprisonment, failed not to produce an impression on my heart. The Grand Marshal and the General remained with me for a considerable time, and Sir Hudson Lowe had the politeness to say that they might, if they pleased, stay and breakfast with me. He retired, taking with him all his people, with the exception of the officer on duty at Longwood, who had escorted the gentleman to the castle. This officer was Captain Poppleton, with whose conduct we had always found reason to be perfectly satisfied. During our breakfast, over which we sat for a very long time, we certainly might, in spite of the presence of Captain Poppleton, have found means to make secret communications with each other, but we had none to make, and not a syllable of private nature passed between us. Had I foreseen this unexpected circumstance, I might have put into my son's hands the whole of my correspondence with Sir Hudson Lowe, and it might by this means have been easily transmitted to Longwood. However, on reflection, I congratulated myself on not having made any such attempt. I still distrusted Sir Hudson Lowe, and from the endeavors he made to prevail on me to remain, he would certainly have availed himself of such a discovery as an excuse for changing all the arrangements that had been made and issuing fresh orders. Breakfast being ended, I was the first who had courage to rise and take farewell. I sent to request that the governor would come and execute the final measures. I embraced my friends, and they left me. General Gourgaud, at parting, several times feelingly alluded to the little vexations which had occasionally arisen up between us. I felt happy in expressing my conviction that they had been wholly occasioned by the painful circumstances in which we were placed, and that our hearts had no share in them. I cherish with sincere gratitude the remembrance of the kind attentions which I received from General Gourgaud during the latter period of my residence at St. Helena. Sir Hudson Lowe, on his return, seeing the Grand Marshal and General Gourgaud go out, said to me significantly, and with appearance of embarrassment and vexation, "So you do not intend to return to Longwood? It may be presumed you have good reasons for refusing to do so." A bow was my only reply, and I begged that the governor would immediately proceed to seal up the papers, the only thing that now remained to be done. Some days previously, I had demanded that an authentic inventory of my papers should be made out. This was done, and I obtained a copy of it, signed by Sir Hudson Lowe. All that was now to be done was to affix the seals. The governor delayed this formality until the last moment, and he concluded, in a way perfectly characteristic of his disposition, he told me in very fair words, but with an appearance of constraint, that out of respect for the Emperor, as well as from personal consideration for me, he would willingly permit me to affix my seal to the papers, provided I would consent that he should break it during my absence, if he thought necessary. I smiled at this proposal and declined it, upon which he walked with hasty strides up and down the room for some time, and then, as if coming to a sudden determination, he exclaimed, "I will take the whole upon myself. I would dispense with your seal." He called in the government secretary, and the seals of the island were affixed to the papers in my presence. I requested that he would furnish me with a declaration of his refusal to permit me to seal them with my arms, or the singular condition he had attached to my doing so. This was a new subject to hesitation, but the point was at length settled by the governor furnishing me with the declaration in the following terms. Declaration of Sir Hudson Lowe to Count de las Casas. In consequence of what was stated and the governor's decision relative to the affair of Count de las Casas, a great number of the count's papers are now at the moment of his departure from the island, detained. The governor, whose special duty it is to suffer no papers whatever coming from Longwood to leave the island without being previously examined, has, however, for private reasons thereto abstained from noticing all that were sent by Count Las Casas. The governor has determined that the papers belonging to the count, which have been detained, out of which Sir Hudson Lowe knows only the general tenor, shall be put into 2 separate packets and deposited in the treasury of the island until orders be received from government respecting them. Countless causes may affix his seal to each of these packets, with the understanding that the seal may be broken, either in case it should be necessary to convey the packets from the island in conformity with orders from the government, or in case the interest of the service should require the packets to be opened. Thus, the affixing of this seal is merely a moral guarantee which the governor offers to countless causes for his own satisfaction, to afford him the assurance of the packets not being open except for one of the urgent reasons above specified. If under these circumstances countless causes should decline affixing his seals to the packets or refuse to accede to the condition on which the affixing of his seal is permitted, the governor, who cannot permit any sealed packet or any papers whatever coming from Longwood to pass from his hands without examination, considers as necessary every precaution calculated to assure his government that he has adopted proper measures for the security of the papers that are detained until he shall receive orders respecting them. Countless causes having refused to affix his seal on the conditions above mentioned, the papers, divided into 2 distinct packets, have been deposited in 2 boxes, sealed with the seals of the government and the island. H. Lowe, December 31st, 1816. All business being now settled between us, Sir Hudson Lowe, by a characteristic turn of behavior, which he had oftener than once exhibited since I had been his prisoner, either from motives of civility or calculation, immediately wrote for me several letters of introduction to his private friends at the Cape, who he assured me would prove very agreeable to me. I had not the courage to refuse these letters. Such was the sincerity with which they appeared to be offered. At length, the long-looked-for moment of departure arrived. The governor accompanied me to the gate of the castle and ordered all his officers to attend me to the place of embarkation. This, he said, was intended as a mark of respect. I eagerly jumped into the boat, which was in readiness to receive me. I crossed the port and passed near a vessel which had just arrived from the Cape, on board of which, to my surprise, I observed the Pole and 3 servants who had been sent away from us several months before and who were now on their way to Europe. They saluted me by gestures as I passed, and I need not say how much I was astonished to see them. One of these individuals, who was the bearer of the only document which escaped from the island, namely the letter on the subject of the Allied commissioners, I doubted not but the discovery that had been made with respect to my servant would furnish the governor with an excuse for searching those persons who were far from suspecting such a thing. Fortunately, however, no search took place, and the faithful Santini had the merit of being the first to convey to Europe any authentic account of Longwood. At length, I got fairly on board the brig. She weighed anchor, and I thought my last wishes accomplished. But these vain illusions were destined to be cruelly destroyed, and my ultimate experience of the hearts of certain men proved that all the hopes I had formed were but vain chimeras. How could I so far deceive myself as to rely on the sensibility of those very men who, in defiance of all law, had pronounced the sentence and ordered the execution? Why did I not stay to administer domestic consolation rather than dream of rendering remote services? I might have continued my daily attentions for some time longer and have obtained some additional marks of interest, and when the fatal moment arrived, I should have had my share in the general grief. I might have contributed to assuage the anguish of Napoleon's last moments and have helped to close his eyes. But no! Perhaps the effect of the climate, operating on my feeble state of health, would soon have hurried me from this world. I should probably not have lived to witness the sad event. I should have been spared the grief that now presses upon my heart. I should not have had to struggle with the cruel infirmities brought from my place of exile. My ashes would there have reposed in peace, and thus to have closed my life might have been looked upon as an additional favor of my happy star, or the last blessing of heaven. This perhaps ought to be the conclusion of my journal. Since I am now removed from St. Helena and can no longer record the words of the emperor, However, the following pages are so intimately connected with what concerns Napoleon that I'm convinced I need offer no apology for continuing. From Tuesday, December 31st, 1816 to Friday, January the 17th, 1817, when daylight appeared, St. Helena no longer existed for us, except in our hearts. We were rapidly sailing away from that dear and accursed spot in the middle of the ocean and at an immense distance from both the old and the new world. The officers and the crew treated us with the most marked benevolence. Their care, their attention, their deference, the sympathy they expressed were such that, but for the language which I heard spoken, I might have fancied myself on board of a French vessel. To the shyness and circumspection of St. Helena had succeeded a complete freedom from restraint. I then learnt how much I was indebted to Admiral Malcolm. It was he who had obtained for me the favor of a brig of war instead of the wretched transport with which I had been threatened. As soon as he was apprised of Sir Hudson Lowe's determination, he hastened to go and offer him one of his ships, assuring him that he could spare one to save me from the inconveniences and the privations to which I should otherwise be exposed in making a signal. He had brought into the harbor the Griffin, the commander of which was one of the officers whom he most liked. It has already been seen that the admiral brought with him to see me. The admiral had manifested a desire to see me at the commencement of my captivity, but had, from motives of prudence, waited until the moment of my departure. He had chiefly dreaded, I was told, that I should lay my case before him and appeal to him to judge between me and the governor, with regard to whom he found himself placed in a very delicate situation. But he might have felt perfectly secure on that score. I had had too much experience and seen too much to fall into such an error. My son devoted part of our passage to copy some papers which we had purposely torn, and the fragments of which we had distributed in various places among our baggage or about our persons. Sir Hudson Lowe had rendered the precaution necessary by informing me a short time before that he should again search my papers before my departure in order to see what I might have written during my captivity. I took the liberty to represent to him that such an act would be tyrannical in the extreme and devoid of delicacy. I would then turn out, said I, that you only allowed me the use of pens and papers for the purpose of possessing yourself of ideas, which, but for that permission, I should have kept to myself. This would be a most perfidious snare, which your tribunals would no doubt condemn, and which would be strongly reprobated by all upright minds. Sir Hudson Lowe probably felt the justice of this argument, for he never mentioned the subject again. The most important of these papers, the document I valued most, was what I called a statement of our grievances at Longwood. Whilst I was in Sir Hudson Lowe's power, our conversations led me, at his own request, to make out a hasty statement enumerating our grievances. My son's ill health and the state of my eyes prevented us from taking a fair copy of that statement for ourselves. I had asked the governor to let me have some person to copy for me, but which request he did not comply with, and I did not think it delicate to insist, since it was to lay before him a statement which must be very pleasant to him. On the other hand, as I was speaking without the knowledge of my companions and yet frequently their names, it was of great importance to me that they should be acquainted with what I said in order to set me right if I had any errors. At the moment of my departure, I told Sir Hudson Lowe that I had completed the statement and showed him the parcel sealed, the contents of which I said I proposed to have copied at the Cape, or even on board the brig, and to send him 2 copies, one for himself and one for Longwood. Sir Hudson appeared to value the offer very much, but preferring, however, another arrangement. It was agreed that I should immediately deposit my manuscript in the hands of a third person in order that each party might take a copy of it, and that the original should afterwards be returned to me. I therefore sought some person whose honorable disposition inspired me with confidence. General Bingham, the second in command in the island, was the first person I thought of. To him I therefore addressed my manuscript, with the governor's consent, and under the express condition that it should be shown at the same time to Sir Hudson Lowe and to Count Bertrand, who was aware of the arrangement. I shall not proceed to lay that document before the reader. It contains nothing but repetitions, no doubt. But could that be otherwise? At all events, it will give an uninterrupted summary, and on that account must claim indulgence. It is besides a document which it is indispensable for me to produce. Statement of our grievances at Longwood, sir, and the various interviews that have taken place between us in consequence of my personal captivity. Some reflections have been interchanged concerning Longwood, which have frequently recurred to my mind. You have often repeated that we at Longwood were in error, and that we strove to remain so. It is in vain that I have represented to you that such was precisely the observation which we every day made between ourselves with respect to you. You still continue to insist on this point with the appearance of the most positive conviction. On another occasion you told me that we ought to have stated our grievances to you, but you would have sent the statement to the British ministers and would willingly have given publicity to what personally related to yourself. I observed to you that my letters which had passed through your hands were tolerably well calculated to fulfill that object, that my letter to Prince Lucian, which occasioned my present seclusion, had been intended to pass through your hands in like manner, but that you had forbidden my writing any letters. That prohibition, you have said, was on account of the reflections they contain. But our sufferings being chiefly moral, must they not therefore necessarily give rise chiefly to reflections? These objects and several others of the same description would have required to be more fully explained. They would have required a regular conversation quietly carried on between us, but you did not furnish any opportunity for such a conversation, and I did not seek for one. However, an impression has been thereby left on my mind, which has been strengthened by other incidental circumstances, that you have not the slightest notion of your position with respect to Longwood, or that you do not understand and are even unconscious of part of the wrongs you have inflicted upon us. This, though it does not obliterate those wrongs altogether, in my opinion, has at least the effect of removing the most odious portion of them, the bad intention. From that instant, I formed the resolution to devote the leisure afforded by my seclusion to inform you of those wrongs. My situation and the moment are most favorable. I shall write calmly and without passion. I shall not feel that degree of animosity which I should probably have felt at Longwood before I saw you here. Besides, this will only be my personal opinion. My statements will be purely individual. They will be dictated by the love of truth, and I shall own it, whether I can be just, by a kind of interest which I now feel towards you, for the unpleasant restraint under which I am now kept by you does not prevent me from perceiving the politeness with which at the same time you treat me. After all, sir, read this calmly. Recollect that these are our grievances, which I am going to retrace, what I call the wrongs, either real or apparent, which you have inflicted upon us, and that I now state them here with the utmost candor, as if I were inserting them in my journal, or as if you were not to read them. And if I happen to err in some of the details, I request you will consider that you have deprived me of all of my papers, that I can no longer access the official documents that I write, so this will be from recollection only, and that I am ready to retract every error of any consequence which you may point out to me. I shall take up the facts from the beginning by a sudden reverse. A great sovereign at the summit of power, betrayed by fortune and men, had lost his throne and his liberty, and found himself thrown on a horrible rock in the midst of the ocean. And all these events had succeeded each other so rapidly that everything was accomplished before anything had been determined. We therefore anxiously awaited at St. Helena the decision of our fate, but we awaited it at least with the consolation which the excess of misfortune can suggest, the belief that our situation could not possibly become worse than it was. The eyes of Europe, we said, are fixed upon our rock, and nations will now judge the conduct of kings. They doubtless will be lavish of proofs of respect and marks of attention in expiation, at least, of what they call political necessity. In England, the language of the legislature and the expression of public opinion have tended to encourage such hopes, and the British ministers, the responsible depositories of the glory of their nation, cannot possibly on this occasion gratify their own hatred, if they have any, at the expense of morality and public sentiment. A man is appointed to take the command here. You, sir, were the person alluded to, who holds a distinguished rank in the army. He owes his fortune to his personal merit. His life has been passed in diplomatic missions at the headquarters of the sovereigns of the continent, where the name, the rank, the power, the titles of the Emperor Napoleon must have been familiar to him. He will be acquainted with the relations, both public and individual, that existed between the emperor and those sovereigns who for a long time called him brother, and who have been his friends or allies or are his kinsmen. He will know that at Châtillon it depended solely on the emperor to reign in France with the consent of England herself, and that at a later period he might have retained the possession of other countries. This man, we said, in his diplomatic career will have formed just notions, both with respect to persons and things. He will probably laugh at himself now that the object is attained, at the mass of falsehood and libel which fear and policy had invented for the vulgar, and having been placed in such situations, he would now accept a mission founded on principles different from those thus established, and having any other object than to better our present condition. His arrival alone is therefore a sufficient pledge of the favorable nature of his instructions with respect to us. Did you not tell me, said the emperor to us one day, that he was at Champ-au-Père and at Montmirail? We have then probably exchanged a few cannonballs together, and that is always in my eyes a noble relation to stand in. Such were the dispositions in which Sir Hudson Lowe was expected. You arrived, sir, and your visit at Longwood was made at an improper hour, at an hour at which the emperor had never received anybody, and without having previously sent one of your aides de camp to inquire what time would be most agreeable to him, a formality which you would not certainly have omitted with your ministers, or even with any person merely your superior, either in England or on the continent. And yet, with whom were you acting thus? The emperor did not receive you. This first step was not propitious, it must be admitted, but so much were we prepossessed in your favor that we were willing to suppose that, being but just arrived in the island, advantage had been taken of that circumstance to induce you to begin with us by an insult. A few days afterwards, you were going round Longwood and extolling to one of us the beauty of that spot, which can only be for us a place of desolation. It was observed to you that there was a total want of shade, which was a great privation to the emperor. Trees shall be planted, was your horrible reply, which penetrated to the bottom of our hearts, but the cruelty of which I now wish to believe you did not yourself perceive. You brought with you an order obliging us to make a declaration that our residence at St. Helena was quite voluntary, and that we engaged to submit to all the restrictions that might be imposed upon us. It was then whispered about amongst us by whom or from what motive, I know not what, that in so doing we were going to sign our exile for life. And yet you must have seen how willingly all, from the first officer down to the lowest servant, hastened to comply with this order. You came again a few days afterwards with the signatures of the servants. You wanted, you said, to collect them together in order to speak to them. and you wish to have the emperor's consent for that purpose, I replied to you that you had the power to act as you thought proper, but that it would be useless to affect a mark of attention, which would only be an additional insult. We were in the habit of considering the circle that surrounded the emperor as a sacred sanctuary. If your ministers had granted 12 servants which had not been asked of them,